Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this meeting of the Norfolk, Wrentham, and Plainville Select Board / Boards of Selectmen, depending on how you refer to yourselves these days. We are attempting to execute a fully remote participation meeting for this meeting, because why not throw in 3 towns when you're just getting the hang of it with 1 town? We do have a few things to go through tonight, but we do ask that everybody bear with us. We do have a few unique items to go through in terms of intro and identification of attendees. So we'll make our way through that to begin, and then we'll start getting into our agenda. So I will start off by saying that as a preliminary matter, this is Kevin Kalka, Chair of the Norfolk Select Board. Please permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. For the Norfolk Select Board, Chris Weeder. Chris, I believe you're still muted. You had it for a brief moment there. If you could just unmute and say that you're here. Kevin, would you mind assisting with an unmute?
Can you hear me now, Kevin?
Beautiful. Thank you, sir. Cece Van Tine.
I am here.
Very good. And for our staff, Town Administrator Blythe Robinson. Blythe, I believe you're still on mute.
Kevin, is Blythe represented as iPad?
No, she was in the room as her own entity, but now as I cycle through, I do not believe I am seeing her. I'll move on and we can go back to her once we get started. One more, we have our Executive Assistant, Judith Lazardi.
Present.
Thank you, Judith. All right, with that, I will toss it over to my counterpart from Plainville, Jeff Johnson.
Yes, as a preliminary matter, this is Jeff Johnson, Chair of the Plainville Select Board. Permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. When I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Brian Kelly.
I'm here.
Stanley Wydack. Are you on mute again, Stan? Kevin, perhaps you could unmute Stan if you could.
Am I on now, Jeff?
Yeah, thank you. And representing our staff, Town Administrator Jennifer Thompson.
I'm here.
Good, thank you very much. With that, I'll turn it over to Joe Botash, the Chair of the Wrentham Select Board.
Thank you. As a preliminary matter, this is Joseph F. Botash II, Chairman of the Wrentham Board of Selectmen. Permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on this agenda are present and can hear me. At this time, I will do a request for our Board of Selectmen. So members, when I call your name, please respond affirmative. James Anderson. Jim, if you can unmute. *6 if you're on a phone. James Anderson. I can see he's muted.
Joe, what numbers, Jim?
He's the 508-954, if I'm not mistaken.
Jim, can you hear us?
Jim Anderson, present.
Thank you. Stephen Langley.
I'm here.
Jerome McGovern.
Jerry McGovern, present.
Gerald Nolan. Jerry Nolan.
Jerry Nolan, present.
Thank you. Staff members, staff, I will call your name and please respond in the affirmative. We have our town administrator, Kevin Sweet,
Kevin Sweet, present.
and we have our administrative assistant, Amanda Vasapolo.
I'm here.
Okay, thank you. Kevin, I'll turn it back to you.
All right, given that, we're going to introduce ourselves into the meeting. What we're going to do here, my fellow chairs will be reading the first paragraph of the introduction for their respective boards as a call to order. So I will start, and then once they finish their introductions, I will finish the rest of the outline. Good evening. This open meeting of the Norfolk Select Board is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12th, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. I will toss it over to my counterpart, Jeff Johnson.
Good evening. This open meeting of the Plainville Select Board is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. And over to Joe.
Joe, you're muted.
Is that better?
Better.
It's a matter of opinion. Good evening. This is the open meeting of the Norfolk, Plainville, and Wrentham Select Board being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of COVID-19.
Thanks, Joe. So in order to mitigate the transmission of the COVID-19 virus, we have been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings. And as such, the governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will feature public comment at the conclusion of each agenda item. For this meeting, the Norfolk, Plainville, and Wrentham Select Boards are convening by video conference via Zoom, posted on each respective town's agenda identifying how the public may join. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that some attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that other folks may be able to see you and to take care not to share your screen on your computer. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by this recording. A quick note on meeting materials. All supported meeting materials have been provided to members of this body and are available on the individual town's websites unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agendas. A couple of business meeting ground rules. We are now turning into the first item on our agenda. Before we do so, permit me to cover some ground rules for effective and clear conduct of our business and to ensure accurate meeting minutes. We will introduce each speaker on the agenda, and after they conclude their remarks, the respective board chairs will go down the line of members, inviting each by name to provide any comments or questions. Please hold until your name is called. Further, please remember to mute your phone or computer when you are not speaking, and please remember to speak clearly and in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. On the point of public comment, after the members of all boards have spoken, the hosting town administrator, Kevin Sweet from Wrentham, will afford public comment as follows. The Wrentham town administrator will first ask members of the public who wish to speak to identify their names and addresses only. And once the Wrentham town administrator has a list of all public commentators, he will call on each one by name and afford them around 3 minutes for any comment. So if there is nothing else from an introductory standpoint, or if people are just sick of us hearing us say the same thing over and over again, we will make our way into our agenda. One thing I did want to cover first, Joe, did you have anything you wanted to note for members in attendance tonight, or are we moving into the agenda?
No, I think we're good to move into the agenda.
Thank you, sir. All right, our first agenda item tonight is the discussion of the King Philip School District FY21 budget. We're going to be having a discussion surrounding the budgets and the brainstorming of healthcare insurance costs. I think the way we're going to start off this conversation is by getting a nice high-level overview from each of the town administrators to identify where we are with the municipal budgets in each of the three towns. And as such, I will toss it over to the Norfolk Town Administrator, Blythe Robinson.
Good evening, everyone. So for Norfolk, we're still working on last details of our proposed budget for next year, but we are at approximately a 2.33% increase in our overall budget from FY20 to FY21. And included in that budget is the amount that has been certified for Norfolk from the King Philip School District, which is a 1.46% increase. That's my overview, unless you'd like more details.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, Blythe. With that, we'll toss it over to the Town Administrator from Plainville, Jennifer Thompson.
Good evening. So we have just finished compiling all the budgets, and FinCom was to have their first meeting Thursday. We have been meeting, we have a financial task group that's been meeting since the fall, just because we had a pretty difficult budget year last year, and we anticipated that this year would be even more difficult, which it is. So we've been meeting and strategizing and coming up with different budget scenarios. King Philip has been a part of that with us. Just we wanted to include all of our schools so that they understood the situation, especially as it's unique to Plainville. But you know, on top of an already difficult budget situation, Plain Ridge closing due to the COVID-19 adds an additional strain that we're not really sure how long it will last or how much it will impact us. So we have a challenging budget that just got a lot more challenging.
Thanks, Jen. And finally, I'll toss it over to the Wrentham Town Administrator, Kevin Sweet. Kevin, if you're talking, I believe you might be on mute.
Kevin, can you hear me? Sorry about technical difficulty on this end. Yeah, thank you. So similar to as Jen was saying, you know, we're fully engaged in the budget process, meeting with department heads, finalizing some numbers, waiting on some big cost-related items related to our health insurance costs that finally came in early March. And then, of course, with the COVID-19 crisis has really changed that quite a bit as far as the process of where we were at. Haven't really been able to dive back in the budgets over the last 2 weeks. No secret for us, our big impacts of FY21 are around the education budget. The actual increase related to the King Philip budget for the, you know, on the adopted budget by the King Philip School Committee puts Wrentham at a 7.82% overall budget increase for FY21, which is a big hit to any available revenue that we have, as well as 6% health insurance cost on our own, as well as you know, both Blythe and Jen and I have talked quite extensively around the retirement assessments and a number of other factors that are contributing to it. In addition, for Wrentham, we are looking at increasing our public safety numbers, particularly around a SAFER grant that was received for the fire department, which accounts for an additional 6 additional firefighters to supplement our needs, of which the town is responsible for 25% of those costs. So we have a number of budget challenges as we face FY21, and as I said, we continue to push ahead and try to finalize where we're actually going to end up. There's still some more work related to that. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. So as that all ties into the focus and goal for this agenda item tonight, I think a lot of the focus has been put on the healthcare costs in the proposed King Philip budget. There's a lot of questions surrounding any efficiency, any opportunity, any chances for improved consistency. We've been looking at some of the individual town numbers as they pertain to these values, and I think we wanted to just group up as a collective body and identify if there were any opportunities for us to be able to get to a better spot from that perspective. To that end, I'd like to toss it over to Superintendent Paul Zinni if there was anything that you'd like to add in terms of any highlights of what's changed since our initial presentation of the approved budget to where we are today.
Good evening, everyone. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes, sir.
I've got a lot of this mute and unmute stuff going on. I wanted to make sure that I wasn't just talking to myself, which tends to be the general norm for me these days. Thank you all for inviting us this evening. I'm joined on this call with by Larry Azer, who's our business manager, you know, who's the mastermind behind the budgets. For those of you who are watching, you can see him waving. And so with your indulgence, if there are questions further on, I would encourage Larry to also jump in. Basically what I would say is we did our first presentation of the budget back in January. And at that time, we have to make broad sweeping speculations regarding much of what the budget will look like. We only have preliminary figures from the state and from our own budget analysis. And at that point, we were looking at over a 4% increase to our budget to even get to a level service budget. The good news was that by the time we were able to present our budget to the school committee on March 2nd for their vote of final approval, a few factors had changed. Our facilities numbers, we were able to bring those down by about 90,000. And additionally, where we had been told to project some really high kinds of percentage increase for our health insurance, we were pleased to see that that number came down to about 5% for us for health insurance for the upcoming year. And so with both of those changes adjusted to the budget, we were able to come in and present to the school committee a level service budget of only 3.49%. We were very, very careful as we crafted this budget to be conscious of the kind of wacky way the assessments went this year, recognizing that that was an impact to Wrentham. We knew about the financial constraints to the other community. And so although if you saw our budget presentation, you saw that there were a number of issues or needs that we would like to have brought forward to try to enhance the learning process for King Philip, we did not build any of those into the budget out of respect for what all three communities were struggling with. And so, as I said, the committee voted for only a level service budget. We were able, even in some areas such as special education, to bring down our costs dramatically. Over the last 2 years, our special education costs will, by the end of next year, have gone down by 34%. So again, as I said, we're trying very hard to be cognizant of the town's issues and also making sure that we provide the highest quality education possible. I guess I would say that would be probably all I would have to say at this point, unless people had questions at some point they wanted to pose.
Well, we'll get into questions in a moment. Is there anything that, Larry, you wanted to throw in there as well?
No, I think Paul covered it pretty well.
Very good. So at this point, we'll shift it over to the individual boards. We'll start with a single board and we'll work our way through each member of that board and then toss it over to the next board for any questions or comments that they might have as to the current state of the proposal. From the Norfolk Select Board, I'll first throw it over to Mr. Chris Weeder. Chris, you're still on mute.
How about now? Can you hear me now, Kevin?
There you go. Yes, sir.
Hear me now? Great. Paul, I guess I think it's everybody's going to have the same question is that where do we go in the future here? I mean, and I know you folks have done a level service budget, they're coming in at 3.49, but at what point can we no longer sustain these kind of budget increases? I mean, I think Norfolk and here, and is there, you know, what do you see as the future here? Because I just cannot see any of the towns sustaining these kind of budget increases over the next couple of years. How do we get a handle on this and try to either through regionalization or other ways still provide the highest level of education for our children, but at the same time rein in these budget costs, which continue to rise each and every year?
Well, Chris, I think that's kind of a complicated question and more of an abstract one. I'll do my best to try to answer it as best I can. What I will tell you is that the budget process is a year-long process. We begin in the fall meeting with every single department, looking at what those department needs are, looking at what courses that we need to offer for our students to make sure that they have the classes they need to graduate with the education that we need to guarantee them. We look item by item, department by department, and if you look at our whole budget presentation, you'll see in some of our departments, there's a very small increase. Other departments, there's a larger percentage increase, and in some of our departments, there's a small or even large decrease to that line item. That's because we're not just looking at a whole budget and saying, okay, we just need to increase it by 3% next year and spend accordingly. We go through it line by line, item by item, and do our very best to try to analyze exactly what we need to continue to offer a quality education to students. And we will continue to do that to our best of our ability to try to be as responsible and realistic as we possibly can.
Okay. And I guess my other question was, your facility seems to have jumped up about 8% year over year. Is that from your budget? What's going on in facilities driving this?
I'm going to ask Larry to maybe give us a little bit more detail on that one. There are a variety of factors, but as I said, Larry analyzes that area in greater detail, so I want to make sure I represent that properly.
Yeah, a big part of the increase for next year's budget is that we under budgeted our utilities budget for the current year. So if you compared last year to next year, which is in one of the, I believe is in one of the slides that you guys got, that's in the agenda packet, you'll see that the utility costs from FY19 to FY21 are pretty flat. It's just that this year we under budgeted. And that's because when you create a budget, you're essentially a year behind. You don't have the benefit of having a complete year's worth of data in the current year. So when we were creating the FY20 budget, the year we're in now, we did not have the benefit of having the FY19 data, which showed a big increase. So we were basing it on FY18 and prior, which were lower. I think as we are all experiencing or have been experiencing in the past, utility costs continue to rise for electricity and heating. So we experienced that last year, but we under budgeted in the current year. That's a gap that we had. So obviously we had to correct that for next year. But if you look year over year, we're actually pretty flat in that area. It's just realigning that part of the budget. Other than that, for facilities, the buildings are starting to get old. I know there's a general sense that, well, the buildings were both recently renovated. Well, those renovations were roughly 15 years ago now. So a lot of the components and the equipment in the buildings is getting old and nearing the end of its useful life. We're currently in the process of finalizing a long-term capital plan. We just got back the first draft of it the other day. We're going through that, and once that is completed in the next, well, given where things are at now, might take a little longer, but you will all have a copy of that once that is completed, and you'll see our full-scale needs. But the main issues are around HVAC systems, boilers, rooftop units, univents in the classroom, and those sort of things. You know, we have a motto with our facilities department that when stuff breaks, you have to fix it. Especially if you have things like a roof leak or heating issues, because you have to have a safe and healthy environment for our students and our staff. So if the building is too cold, you know, because a boiler is leaking or has an issue, then we need to get in and fix it. And at the middle school, in particular this winter, Thank God it was a mild winter, because if it had been like prior winters, we were probably would have been in jeopardy of having to close school for some of those days. Dwellers were having so much trouble. So those are just a few examples of the things that are in the facilities budget, and why there's an increase in that. So hopefully that helps with some little explanation on that.
Yes, I mean, I applaud what you've done in special education, Paul and Larry. I mean, it seems as if you're doing a great job of bringing down those costs, which again are uncontrollable. So with that, Kevin, I'm good for the moment. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Cece, over to you.
I don't have, I guess I have one comment and one question. And my comment is that I think that this was obviously the result of a ton of hard work. It's a huge region. I don't know how you regionalize a regional school system, but perhaps there's some things I haven't thought of. But I really like the amount of work that's gone into the budget. That is level service budget. I would only ask, so that's it for this year, but I think that there is obviously an overarching question that we all are going to have, that the landscape, the financial landscape of all three towns, looking at Plainridge for Plainville, but everybody is going to be experiencing a tightening of the belt potentially as a result of the current virus. So I think that you kind of answered it a little bit when you said that maybe with respect to the long-term capital plan, you're going to need to modify that based on what happens in the town. But I'm just curious if you guys have already sort of set expectations that the money that enables the increase this year, such that it's level service, may not be available next year, that we may have another 2010, right, as a result of the 2009 recession. And what do you do? I know you indicated that you plan your budget a year in advance, but so this budget will go to folks' town meeting sometime in June, and you're ramping up in July for next year. At that point, you'll probably have a good sense about whether or not the economy has taken such a hit that you're going to need to modify. What areas do you see that you would be able to modify, such as the long-term capital plan, to protect the education that we need to provide for the kids in light of the potential for a downturn in the economy?
So, Cece, I couldn't agree with you more. We know that the future is certainly one that's questionable right now. What I will tell you is we always put our students and our students' quality education first. That's the first and the foremost for us. And so we don't know what that landscape will look like. And so I'm cautious about, trying to look into a crystal ball and give you projections that may or may not come true, and then have people, kind of remember something I said down the road and think that I misspoke. What I would say is, if there is a problem with the budget moving forward, if the landscape changes dramatically, then the administrative team will sit down with the various departments and we'll look at everything in great detail. Always trying to make sure that the quality of instruction is the most pressing issue that we protect. But do know that there is very little wiggle room. Most of our costs are fixed costs. There's very little that's not fixed. I mean, there are papers for copy machines and things like that, but it's a very, very small percentage of our budget in the bigger picture. And so we will just have to prioritize and do the best we can to make things work. It's funny, in the bigger picture, people hear about budget concerns with schools, and they hear us talk about changes in classrooms and that we will have to let teachers go or things like that. We try to never do that if we can help it, but when we make those changes, they're done internally, and people who don't send children to school never see what those changes look like. So they think because the schools always stay open that everything is fine, when in fact we do struggle tremendously. We have some classes in the high school already that are up to a cap of 35 students in it. And we have some that are far less because they're AP classes or specialty classes that have less students in it. But, you know, in many of our cases, we already have high numbers. So we'll be looking to try to make sure that that doesn't get much higher. And as I said, preserve the quality of education. But to say much more than that at this point, when we don't know what the future looks like, would be too premature to make those kinds of predictions now. But we will be very thoughtful, that I can guarantee.
That's it. I don't have any other questions. My question, to be clear, I wasn't asking what kind of budget you would present, but I think you answered it. I was asking what would your methodology be in the event of a downturn, but I think you answered it.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Cece. Just from my perspective, Paul, Larry, you know, I've had the opportunity to sit through the initial presentation and kind of go through the changes that we've had across the way. If you could you just spend a little bit of time talking about where you were able to identify savings in this budget, so we could, you know, highlight some of the opportunities that were achieved during this process?
Sure. And I'm going to again encourage Larry to jump in. I'm going to highlight, I think, one of the biggest ones, and that's, you know, a few years ago, there were certainly some very big concerns around special education and the costs that went along with that. We have a responsibility. Federal law requires us to provide a free, appropriate public education to any child with a disability. Some of that's done through special education. Sometimes it's done through a 504 plan accommodating for that child's different needs in education. When we can't provide for those needs within the public school setting, we have to look for alternate settings. We have to look for what we refer to as out-of-district placements. Sometimes, no matter how hard we try to build a program that will meet a child's needs, we can't do that effectively because either the number of children that require that program or the specialty of it. And those students automatically have to go to another setting where they can be better served. But in many cases, we can build the programs internally. And when we do, it means that students can stay in their own neighborhood schools, going to school with their peers, going to school with their siblings, and get a high quality education. And so what we've done is to try to reallocate the funds in such a way that we're able to build programs internally. And so more and more of our students are able to stay in the school. They're not going out for out-of-district placements, and then the cost comes down. So it's kind of building the infrastructure internally so that we can avoid much larger costs on the other end of things. And regardless of the cost, it's the right thing to do for kids. It keeps them home. So I would say that is probably one of the biggest areas where we've been able to realize the savings, but it's because of the work that's gone into building that programming. Beyond that, I think Larry, who goes line item by line item, can probably speak to a couple of other examples. So I'll turn that back to Larry.
Really not much more to add to that, but again, like Paul said, I mean, we really practice what essentially is zero-based budgeting. We take our staffing needs and make sure that everybody, you know, looking at class sizes and class offerings and tying them up to schedules. And then all our department heads come in and make presentations and have to literally start from zero and explain everything they want to put in the following year's budget, from supplies to textbooks to equipment to so on and so forth. So if you look at the other parts of the instruction budget, they're really negligible increases, if any. On our technology and budget, our tech department, led by Michael Boyce, has done a really good job. We've been able to, you know, just change our sort of approach. In the past, before Michael and I got into our positions, the district had been leasing computers. And when you look at it, it's not really an efficient thing to do. So we changed our model on that. We've been able to get a lot more newer equipment in the hands of teachers and students. And on our transportation budget, that's a negligible increase as well. When I first got to the district 2.5 years ago, in collaboration with my counterparts at the elementary districts, we didn't do a full joint bid on transportation, but we worked together to put together some commonalities so that we were able to get a really good price. So our transportation budget's only going up at I think 2.5–3% for that. So you know, again, it's looking at every single little part of the budget. I mean, our budget has over 1,000 different accounts, line items, and we review every single one with a fine-tooth comb. You know, like Paul said earlier, we don't just take certain line items and just add a % on top of it. We start from scratch and go from there to try to get every single efficiency we can out of the budget, knowing you know, that the towns make up roughly 3/4 of our budget. We know that every dollar we add to our budget increases your aggregate budgets by 75 cents. So we try to take that to heart when we're doing it.
And Kevin, one other thing I would add is that we also try to aggressively go after whatever grants that we qualify for. Last year, our tech director wrote one for well over $200,000 for infrastructure. That meant that we were able to dramatically change the connectivity for Wi-Fi within the buildings, and that was at no cost to the districts. Additionally, we wrote in collaboration with the elementary districts for over $300,000 worth of funding around mental health issues, and that provided us with some significant supports for all 4 of the town or the school departments, the 3 towns, the 4 school departments. And just last week, we were able to announce not a large grant, but we were able to get a $26,000 grant for coding and curriculum around technology, thanks to Dr. Gilson, our assistant superintendent, who wrote for that. And we just, as I said, heard the word on that. And there are some other grant applications that are in the works. So we are aggressively trying to find other funding avenues to try to provide those kinds of supports as well.
Very good. Thank you both very much. I appreciate the explanations. Well, we do get criticized all the time for Norfolk always going first, so we'll stop stealing everybody's thunder, and I will send it over to my counterpart from Plainville, Jeff Johnson.
Thank you, Kevin. Appreciate leaving some room for us. First, I think I'll turn it over to other members of my board who haven't had as much interaction this spring with Paul and with Larry. Brian, you want to start off with any questions you have after hearing where the towns were at and what the presentation from KP was?
Sure thing, sure thing. I just as you know, former chairman of the Finance Committee and having you know, seen Larry and Paul present several times, I always appreciate the great and thorough job that you folks do, especially since you took over. You know, the presentation that we get is always so thorough and so thoughtful and well done. So again, another great job, and I appreciate it. I'd be remiss if I didn't remind everyone that taxes only go up 2.5% every year. So for any department to have a budget that's above that, that's money that just simply does not exist. And secondly, you know, as we allude to line items and budgets that are uncontrollable, many of those line items become uncontrollable because of negotiations that have happened previously, so that we end up with you know, things that we've negotiated at one point in time, whether it's salaries or benefits, that eventually need to be paid for, and it rolls up into this issue. So there is a point in time when those things can be stemmed, and so I would just kind of start my comments there. As I look at the line items, you know, two jumped out, and I think they've been brought up in the past, and I guess I just ask a couple of quick questions. I don't want to take up too much time, but you know, it obviously looks like facilities and the energy increase having gone up nearly 8% was a big chunk of that delta that, you know, obviously we'd like to curb. Have we done any sort of efficiency audit at the school recently or in the last couple of years? Is there, whether it's installation or replacement of a boiler or something like that can be done to try to reduce this cost? I'm sure it's been touched upon, but if you could summarize for the group.
Go ahead, Larry.
Yeah, so not extensively, no. And that's a big part of the reason why we advocated for and were able to implement a facilities manager this year. And he's done a terrific job. And that is, and now that we have the final stages of the capital plan, that will give us some direction on that. We're also working to get better pricing on our energy contracts. I've been in contact with our energy broker just yesterday and today, trying to lock in some better, some favorable rates on our gas for the heat. We've already done that with electric. And we're also trying to look at solar opportunities. Now, the thing is, the high school roof is probably not in a condition to support solar panels, but the middle school roof should be. So we're trying to get down there. It's a long process, but we're trying to do that. In the meantime, we've been able to tack on or participate in other solar projects where we can sign into it and basically get some of the benefits of that project. So that's already saving us a little bit of money on our energy bills as well.
And Larry, I've only been here a year and a half, but I believe wasn't there some kind of lighting project incentive that was done a few years ago as well?
Yeah, right. So thanks for reminding. About 4 years ago at the high school, there was a project that was done that was paid off through the electric bills, and that's resulted in probably a couple $1,000s a month off the electric bill as well. Now now that has been done, and then again back to the capital plan. You know, I mean, I think people who've been familiar with the schools have known for a while that, you know, these issues exist. It's just a matter of putting funding towards it. And I don't think that the folks that came before Paul and I didn't try to address those issues. It's, as we all know, funding is a challenge. And anything we want to request for capital funding is going to come through the budget. So that would just be even further of an increase. So that's something that I think collectively, you know, all of us need to talk about in the coming, you know, future, about how we're going to reinvest and keep the buildings in a condition where they can run for several more decades and to continue to serve the kids of the towns.
I mean, I know residential wise people, you know, they've got groups that'll come in and do an audit for free. I'm sure that's not the case for a town, but anyway, worth looking for. Two more quick points, and I hopefully won't take up too much time. You mentioned something to the effect of purchasing technology equipment being less expensive than leasing that equipment. Can you explain that to me? Because it looks like the tech budget was about $83,000. And if you're going to put $83,000 out the door in 1 year, you could probably have at least $300,000 worth of equipment and just paid $83,000 this year. So how does that work? It doesn't make sense to me.
Well, with the leases, so let's say it's a 3-year lease. At the end of the 3 years, you either have to return the equipment and get new stuff, or buy it out. In which case, you're buying out 3 or 4 year old equipment. With the purchases, so for example, 2 years ago, I think we purchased new computers for our teachers, and what we're planning to do over this summer is to replace those with better computers, because we're using it even more. And as we've been seeing the last week or so, so many uses for computers and technology. And then the computers the teachers were using will then go to kids to use in the classroom. So in the last couple of years, we've, I think, doubled the number of computers that are available to students. I think right now we're roughly a 2-to-1 ratio in terms of computers to students, which is much better than we were a few years ago. The teachers have did get and will get again better technology. So we're continuing to, explore those kinds of opportunities.
I mean, to me, I mean, I'd like, and obviously you dig in way more into this than I have the ability to, but, thinking about the revolving technology that you've got, if, the useful life on a laptop would normally be 3 years, but you can make do if you're purchasing them and you're using them for, I don't know, 4 or 5. If you looked at all that revolving technology and what it would look like if you, rolled out a 20% of it a year, I don't know, especially since you don't have to worry about disposal, right? You just return them, somebody else is coming and picking them up for you. It sounds like something, or seems like something where there could be a potential cost save there. And then the last
Actually, Brian, it works kind of the other way in that we are able to keep those computers once we buy them and we own them. You'd be amazed at how our tech department is able to kind of nurse them and get a little bit more use out of them. And when they break down, to scavenge the pots to fix others up. And so by owning them, it does a lot. We're not throwing them away at the end. They're being repurposed. And for example, all of our state testing has moved to be online. So the reason why it's so imperative for us to have a number of devices is because we have whole grades of kids who are taking MCAS assessments at the same time. Mm-hmm. And so while some of our computers are not brand new, they're certainly well enough equipped to allow students to use them for those kinds of assessments. So it's given us that kind of flexibility as well to make sure that those devices are being used. But our technology director has been fantastic about trying to figure out the best way to get the most devices in our students' hands, and to make sure that the devices we get are specific for our students' needs. We've moved to Chromebooks because that meets our needs best, and it's a less expensive device. So, we're paying attention to all of that.
Right.
And lastly, as you said, Brian, just to add one more thing, you talked about the increase in the equipment line for technology, but the software and supplies lines have gone down, and so the net increase to the tech budget is 0.5% increase. Mm-hmm. And that 0.5% is going to get new computers for all our teachers, anywhere between 6 and 8 laptop carts, which each have 30 computers in it for kids. Plus, as I said, those teacher computers are going to cycle down to kids. So for practically level funding the technology budget, we're going to be doing an awful lot, or we hope to be able to do an awful lot.
Right. And as I said, with the state requirements, it's imperative that we have that number of devices and we have the connectivity, because otherwise our students, we can't be in compliance with the state as far as the assessments go. The paper and pencil option is not even an option anymore. We have to be online.
Absolutely. And then I don't want to hijack this meeting. I will let one, if you want to move over to Stan at this point. But the only other thing I'm sure you'll address at some point in the meeting is the insurance cost. That was the other big jump. But I won't comment during the meeting any longer. We can keep moving.
Well, I guess we can address it now, or we can address it later. But I mean, back in January, we were very concerned. We had some high numbers. We'd had some significant costs to the insurance program, the plan, over the last year. We were very pleased that when the final percentage came in, it came in at 5%. Reminding everyone that Larry has been working extensively with this company to negotiate the best deals possible, and that 2 years ago it came in at 2.5%, and last year at 3%. So and 5% this year. I think it's when we look at what the towns are facing as well, I don't think the 5 is out of whack at this point, and that's what we have to deal with. Unfortunately, because we're our own municipality, we have to budget in health insurance. Whereas, the other departments, that gets rolled into the town's cost. So that it impacts our overall, request for 3.5% increase for level service. But as I said, we've been, fiscally responsible as far as looking for the best programming and trying to negotiate the best rate. And 5% was a good deal at this point in time.
And the other thing that's driving the insurance cost, or that line item, the reason why it's more than 5% is because we also have 13 more employees on our insurance than we did last year. Even though we didn't really add any new positions for the current year, we had a lot of turnover last summer. About 40 people came into the district, and just with the comings and goings, it's sometimes you just have a year where people who leave didn't have the insurance, people who come on have it. And then on top of that, you have, this has come up with the school committee. We've had a good amount of people going on leaves because they're growing their families. So now you're going to have people going from individual plans to family plans, and so on and so forth. So that's why that line item is more than just the flat 5%. It's because we also have more people on our plans as well. The other part of that.
Makes sense. Thank you.
To that point, can you tell me how many employees we currently have in KP, and how many of them are covered by insurance, health insurance?
I believe 262 is the number of employees for KP. How many are insured? I'm going to be looking over to the block that has Larry. I feel like we were playing Hollywood Squares. I'm going to take Xbox the spot here.
I'll be, so there's about 200, let's see, I think roughly about 210, I think. So it's about 2/3 of the employees right now are on KP insurance. We do have a fairly young staff, and they're coming on, they're coming on and adding to the plans too. So.
Okay, thank you. And sorry, I kind of interrupted Stan's turn, but I didn't. We were already on that point. I didn't want to run away from that. So Stan, if you have some questions, either on the town budgets or towards the KP budget, please go ahead.
No, I do have a question. That you were talking the insurance, and you said, I think, a number of 216. You said about how many are on the insurance, 215. Do the people that aren't taking the insurance, what kind of subsidies are they getting for not taking the insurance from King Philip?
None.
None.
None whatsoever? Okay.
Right.
That was a question that I wanted to ask. This goes back to Larry. Larry, how old is the new King Philip?
What do you mean?
The main school, how old is it now? This is for a capital question.
When it was originally built, you mean?
Yeah.
The high school was originally built in the 50s, I think.
Oh, no, I went to King Philip in 1960, so I know about the old school.
Oh,
okay.
And the middle school. The middle school was built, I think, in the early 60s, some early to mid 60s.
Right, and the new King Philip one, though, I'm talking the new main one on the main road from 9 to 12. How old is that now?
It was built in the 50s.
But the remodel, when
the remodeling?
Renovations.
I think about 15 years ago.
Has it been 15 years ago?
Yeah, right around that, yeah.
So your capital improvements, nothing has been done to that school in the last 15 years, correct?
Not on any large scale, no.
No. Okay. And so I'm a little nervous when you're going to come up with a capital plan fairly soon. My concern is that if the economy really tanks, and I'm a little nervous that the capital improvements in the next 5 years could be very tough to swallow. The well could be dry for the three towns. Is there any way that you could make things go better on the capital, or are you looking at big capital things? Are you looking at roofs for like 3, 4, 5, 7 million, or is it smaller items?
Well, first of all, I'll say I share your nervousness, which is part of why we commissioned the capital plan, so we could get a better grasp of what our needs are. I can't tell you right now what the items are. I can tell you the high school roof is going to need to, if not replaced, then major repairs within the next 5 years, because there's lots of leaks all over the place with that. So we're spending money, good money after bad, patching it and doing that. It's, at a certain point you're just, you might as well just set the money on fire. Although that might help our heating problems too. And I can tell you our HVAC and heating systems, like I said earlier, we've been having a lot of trouble with the boilers at the middle school this year. We've been having issues with the HVAC systems at the high school. So all that, you know, is, if you got to replace a boiler, replace all that kind of stuff that, you know, can get very expensive. Those are probably the major issues that we would see coming in the next, say, 5 years. And yeah, if we can't address them in a wholesale way, then we'll just continue to keep following our motto. If it breaks, we got to fix it, and do what we can to keep the school open and operational and safe for kids.
Okay. All right. I was just a little concerned about the capital, and I'm concerned about actually all the towns, and especially my town, on some of the capital and improvements that everybody would like to do based in the downturn that we're having. And if it gets bad, it's going to be many years before we get back to 2016, 2017 times. So
yep. I
am concerned the well could go dry, and I've been a lifelong resident of Plainville all my life, and it's hard for the average taxpayer to keep up with everything, and that's about it.
Stan, we're concerned as well. Like I said, we're keeping an eye on it, and we'll do the best we can to take very good care of your buildings. That's our goal.
Okay. Thank you, Paul.
Thanks, Stan. Thanks, Paul. One of the topics that I want to spend some time brainstorming about, really for all of us, is health insurance. So I'm not going to talk about health insurance here. We'll wait until after the Wrentham team has their chance at some questions. I just have one quick question and one philosophical comment. The quick question is, do we have an ETA on the capital plan being rolled out to the communities in terms of when we can see what it looks like?
Jeff, honestly, I actually haven't even seen it yet. It's just rolling out now.
No, I know it's being developed. I know it's in process.
Yeah, our plan is to have that finished and published by later this spring.
That's great.
We want to get that to the school committee and to all of you guys as soon as possible, so we can, you know, hopefully start figuring out a plan on that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And my philosophical question is, you know, we're going to need some different kind of thinking, because we've got to figure out a way to get past Proposition 2.5 limitations that are hampering us with needs that are sometimes being outstripped by companies, insurance companies, or other entities that are raising prices faster than that. So we got to take big picture regionalization things that I think are discussions for not for this meeting, and discussions that are going to take a long time to work through.
Well, Jeff, you know that Larry and I are, and obviously the whole district is committed to that. I mean,
yep.
You mentioned earlier you've been having finance meetings, and Larry and I have been frequent flyers at those. We're committed to sit at the table with all three towns in any way possible to try to help with the budget process. We know what you're facing, and we know what we're asking when we're trying to provide the best quality education for your children as possible. And so the only way we can do that is when we all sit together and recognize that we're a team working on the same page. So anytime any of you, the three towns, need us, let us know, like tonight, and we'll be there to try to do what we can to support the process.
And I've appreciated that effort. Thank you both. So with that, and leaving the caveat, we'll come back and do a little bit of brainstorming if we have time on health care costs for towns and KP, all of us. I might turn it over to Joe with the Wrentham BOS.
Thank you, Jeff. Once again, I was hoping that we would primarily be talking more about the healthcare in this meeting. I just want to say to both you, Paul and Larry, that I think KP is doing an outstanding job. The education that youth are getting is phenomenal. I'm always proud to read where these kids are going to, the schools are going to, what they're doing. I have two of my own, and I'm sure, and I know Steve has had his children go through the program, and Jerry McGovern, and Jerry Nolan, and we're not here to beat this up. I want this to be a positive thing on how we can work together, because we're all challenges. Our challenges are the same. And as we'll get into later, that the healthcare is just, it's killing all of us. And we just want to find a proactive way to make life easier for everybody. We hate to sit there and see, as I call it, the elephant in the room with this health insurance, dictate your budget when we could be putting that money towards the education of our children. So I'm going to turn it back over to our board members, and I'm going to start with Selectman Anderson to ask any questions he may have. Jim, you want to unmute?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think I've got a pretty good handle on the King Philip budget. I think I understand where they're coming from. So I'd rather just, defer to other members of the board who may have questions that they'd like to have answered.
Sure. Mr. Nolan.
Yes, I have a question. It probably far-fetched, but I know that the three towns joined together, and I believe you, when it comes to insurance, you're all trying to work together and have one low cost for three towns. Is that correct?
Well, I think currently, Jerry, just to answer that real quick, KP, they vet their own health insurance, just as we do Norfolk and Plainville. I think that's a discussion we're going to have in a few minutes.
All right.
We're all buying it individually as 4 different entities right now.
Correct.
Okay. No, I was just, mostly all the issues that I was concerned with already have been discussed, and I didn't want to beat on it any longer.
All right.
But thinking out of the box, I could talk to you later about it. Maybe we could present it at a different time.
And I'm sure Mr. Azar or Mr. Zinni would love to have a meeting with each one of us if we wanted to spend some time with them to talk, because I think there's, we all learn from each other. A conversation is always something good to learn from.
As we said, we're very happy to speak with anyone at any point. And we're also happy, to maybe create a subcommittee at some point. If, not that I want to create more work for anybody, but if people are feeling like health insurance is something that we should be talking about, maybe between the 3 towns and the 4 districts, maybe then that's a subcommittee that then sits down and brainstorms just that.
Mr. McGovern.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't really have anything to add or ask at this point. It was pointed out to me earlier today to make sure that I disclose that my wife is a teacher at King Philip. I've always found that a little bit ironic because usually I'm a pretty vocal critic of how the King Philip budget process has proceeded and the things that have gone forward through the years up to the town meeting. The reason I say it's ironic is because I know I've been doing this for a fair bit of time. I can't remember ever a year that we would have had a proposal of 3.49% in March, not be ecstatic about that. These are different times. So again, I don't have any specific questions or anything to add, but this is certainly going to take a lot of teamwork to get through this. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Langley.
Thank you, Selectman Botash. Just wanted to also disclose, similar to Jerry, is my daughter is up at KP as a long-term substitute. She's a proud graduate of the class of 2013. So just wanted to disclose that for the group. The only question I had, and Paul and Larry wanted to thank you for putting this together and, for your openness and honesty in answering some of our questions, which in some respects is a far cry from what we have seen in the past, long past, and you guys are doing a great job, so I appreciate it. The question I have is in regard to the E&D amount you're using currently, $300,000. So my first question is, what's the current balance of the E&D, and what was used last year to, I imagine, because I forget, but I imagine some was used last year to help with the budget. So I'm curious about that amount as well.
Yeah, we're actually using 400,000 of it. We increased that, I think 2 years ago, based on, there were some challenges and we put in an extra 100,000 to get that, the budget passed. The current balance is, give me 1 second.
962, Larry? I know that.
I think $962,000. And the proposal for next year calls for $400,000 again.
Mm-hmm.
So the last couple of years, we've been right around that $900,000 mark, and we've been using $400,000 for the budget. So
Right.
now for
Remember,
the current year, we're going to be challenged to generate that E&D amount again, given what's going on right now, because as is the case with almost every municipality and school system in the state, we're still paying our employees. Now that's budgeted for, but we have been spending some overtime on facilities with all this extra cleaning we're doing, and if and when we open again, we're going to have to stay on top of that. But you know, that's where we've been running the last couple of years.
Right. I think it's important to mention too that we can go up, you know, we can reserve up to 5%, and we're what, about 2.5%, Larry, if memory serves me?
Roughly in that ballpark, yeah.
And remember, unlike we're again our own municipality, so where a town has free cash, all we've got is E&D. And as Larry was describing to you, all kinds of things can happen. You know, he mentioned the winter that we had this last winter. We've got 3 boilers at the middle school, and only one of them is working properly right now. Fortunately, because of the mild winter, we've been able to use bubble gum, duct tape, and a few rubber bands to hold everything together. But if we had had that severe winter and really had to pump out the heat, we could have had some serious problems. And that's where, when you have that emergency in the middle of the year, if we use every dime of our E&D, and we have to come back to you as a community, there's no place to pull it from. Where right now we can come back to you as communities and say, this is where, you know, the E&D is. Now, we don't want to keep lots of money in there when you're struggling to balance your budgets as well. So it's kind of like, how do you find that balance? And we feel like, you know, that's what we've tried to do here. We need to keep some money in that E&D for that emergency that we can't predict, but we also recognize that you need us to use as much of that as we can so that it's not too much of a strain on your budgets town-wide.
Right. Thank you, gentlemen. I certainly wasn't advocating using more. I was just curious overall. And,
Sure.
you know, I agree with you. You have to have the event that some catastrophic issue comes up that you need to deal with. So
Great.
I appreciate that. Thank you for your answers. And I am all set for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I forget, I was complimenting Mr. Zinni and Mr. Azar on the great job they do. I have to also compliment, and I'm sure the other chairs will agree with me, our superintendents at the elementary schools are doing a fabulous job. They're turning over some great projects to King Philip, and I'm so happy. I sit on the school committee meetings at Wrentham Elementary, and when I hear the collaborative stuff that's going on, the grant for mental health, it makes me feel good that these conversations are happening and that you're really invested. All of you are invested in the highest quality of education for our children, and I love that because I'm a proponent of public schools, and when I see the good stuff, I really enjoy seeing it. This conversation, Kevin, myself, and Jeff have been meeting for some time over, probably about the last year. We've had various meetings about collaboratives and how we can work together to make things better. And you know, I spoke at your public hearing, and it was about health insurance. And I have to admit, when I went in, I wasn't kind of half educated on it. What my concern was, I'm hearing about, you know, like I heard when I started with the Wrentham Board of Selectmen, the co-pays and things of that nature, when you were going up 12%. And I got up there and I said, you know, we got to talk about health insurance. And I asked for some information, and I thank you both, Larry and Mr. Zinni, for providing it. And I think there was a spreadsheet that was circulated today that gives us a picture of where we are with health insurance. And I think this is what we need to talk about. And I'm glad you said a subcommittee. If it was up to me, if I had to pick the subcommittee, it would be Mr. Azar, Mr. Zinni, Mr. Cameron, the superintendents from Plainville and Norfolk, and along with our superintendent, our town administrator, because, and I think it's up on the screen, this thing, as I looked at it, it was an education for all of us. As I looked down at Wrentham, you know, I looked and said, well, we're paying, the average per employee is $12,449, and KP's at $17,804, and I'm like, hey, you know, you got to do something. But then when I looked at the other towns, I said to Kevin, we have to do something also. So this is not a problem that it's just the KP. I get some of those columns a little bit narrow, and I apologize for that. But, you know, there's room for improvement for all of us in this department. And it's, you know, besides, I think, besides payroll, I think we're seeing this is probably one of our biggest drivers. And how can we, as a group, can we go out together, the four entities, and purchase health insurance in a way that's going to bring our costs within reason? That's what I'm hoping to get out of this meeting. Can we commit? I know it's not going to fix the 2021 budget. We may find some low-hanging fruit that would maybe save a little bit of money, but is there something we can do to really make this work long-term for all of us? Because everyone said it. This is 2000 all over again, possibly with the recession. We don't know how we're going to recover from this COVID-19, what the economy's going to be like. So I think here is a good opportunity for us to move forward. And I think with Jeff and Kevin, I think we met back in January. We kind of agree that there's opportunity here, and I think this is where we want to work. And I'm going to go back to Kevin and Jeff and ask them to chime in.
Sorry, I needed to unmute myself. I think it's always easy to call health insurance everyone's favorite piñata, and especially think about somebody else's health insurance is the big problem. And certainly KP's had a big target on them after the initial budget presentations. But Joe's right. We all could do better with our health insurance, and part of that may be bargaining together as one entity instead of four separate ones. Part of it, I think, is going to be coming up with a good set of plans on how we can buy more people out of taking insurance from us, and instead of relying on the private insurance they get from a spouse's employer, for instance. I think right now we have a situation where people like our insurance a lot, which is great. They should, but we're spending over $10 million a year on health insurance, and that's a big number for the three towns.
And I don't know how much more I can add to that, but insurance has been a big topic of conversation, at least from Norfolk's budgeting process. We've been discussing different methods for buybacks, as Jeff had noted, as well as taking a look at our retiree insurance plans in comparison with other communities in the area. It's not an easy conversation, right? It's got a lot of implications down the road for a lot of people, but I do think that there is a distinct benefit to us unifying and collectively looking at solutions for further down the road. And I think, Joe, you made a great point when you said that there isn't really anything that we're going to be able to do that's going to have a measurable impact on FY21 from this perspective. And I think that if we all go in understanding that, we're going to start off in a much better place to get to a better area for FY22 or further on.
Right. I just wanted to add one thing, is that in the spreadsheet, the KP, we didn't break out your, as you presented and everybody else, the senior supplement plans compared to the active plans. But I did have one question. I kind of lumped them when I did it, and it was kind of early in it. But one question I had is, you're the only entity that has family plans for retirees, and I just thought that was kind of unusual, and I was curious where that, I guess people are retiring younger. Who have active families. Is that the case?
That's a good question. To be honest with you, I have not given that a lot of thought, a lot of attention, but it's certainly something we can look at. I mean, the way our insurance is structured, that when employees retire, they can stay on the same plan up until they turn 65 and switch over to Medicare. So we do have some who do that. Just to talk about things that we can do for the short term, one thing I want to make sure we mention is that we will be starting to offer high deductible, so-called HSA plans with health savings accounts plans. We're going to start offering those for next year, effective July 1st. We don't know how many employees are going to take it, but we're going to start offering them. It's in addition to our existing plans. Now, we're going to be a little challenged to get signups on that if we're not in school, because we need to communicate and educate people on them. But that is our intention right now, is to start offering those plans, and those would have, I think it's a 7% savings, between the regular plan and the high deductible plan if someone switches down. So that would have a fair amount of savings. And again, we don't know how many people are going to sign up for it, and we won't even know that until the end of May for open enrollment. And when we've seen these in other communities, other districts, it's a slow start, and then it ramps up over a number of years as 5 people sign up the first year, and then their friends and coworkers see that, oh well, it's actually pretty good, and things, word of mouth and so on. So that could take a while, but that's one thing we are starting to do right now, is offering those additional plans.
Mr. Chair, if I could just jump in on that, follow up with Larry. Larry, are you also looking at offering an HSA match at all? So we did this as part of our PEC agreement, and we actually have seen far more jump onto the benchmark plan than we anticipated. And I think a lot of it is educating the employees. And once the employees themselves become educated around it, they're your biggest advocate. And once they're an advocate for it, those that can benefit from the high deductible, both the employee and the employer save. But I'm just curious what you guys are looking at for HSA and any matches.
We are not looking at a match right now. So we know obviously that's going to, potentially reduce the uptake, but it being a new product, we wanted to sort of see how it would go just as is. In the future years, we may look at doing a match though.
One thing I want to say to Norfolk, to Kevin in CC, and to Chris and to Blythe, I want to applaud you for your +1. I think that's a great avenue to pursue for health insurance, and it's something that I think we should all look at. It saves money. I know nobody wants to hear about the health insurance changing and your deductible going up, your co-pays and all that, but I just think that I look at this spreadsheet, and I think you both have it, correct, Mr. Zinni and Mr. Hsa?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It kind of opened your eyes a little bit, because it opened mine. Like I said, and the worst thing that happened was that that I saw this and brought it up to Kevin, because I'm like, hey, but Kevin agrees. It's maybe we've taken the easy way out for the last few years in regards to just going with whatever's easy to low. But I look at the average cost of $8,300 is by Norfolk, $8,383. Even Wrentham is at 12 change. Plainville's in the same ballpark. I think love to see what you people are doing, and let you people work with the TAs to come up with something to help. I'm sure we're not trying to reinvent the wheel, but I'm sure this conversation is happening in many different places, and I think this is an avenue to I ran some numbers alone from us that we could save money by doing a couple of things, and I think this is a way to not only fix things for today but for tomorrow.
Yeah, we've had some discussions on our end about doing the +1. Mm-hmm. The challenge with that is when you shift from the 2-tier like we have now to the 3-tier, or even a 4-tier, where you could have employee plus spouse or employee plus child, is that you're going to move people from a family plan down to the individual +1 plans, which is at a lower price. But the insurer needs to make the same amount of money to cover the claims, because the claims aren't going to change. So if I go from, me and my wife on a family plan for $2,500 to me and my wife on a +1 plan at $1,500, everything else being equal, we're going to have the same experiences for claims, and so the cost of the insurer is going to be the same, yet they're making $1,000 less a month. So they need to recoup that somehow. So what ends up happening is you insert this 2nd or 3rd tier in the middle, but the total cost doesn't change. So those costs have to be reallocated then to your individual plans or your family plans or both. And so they're going to experience increases. So we looked at it this year, we felt we didn't have enough time to really get into crunch it, and it would be a big change. So, but that's definitely something we have still to look at for the future, is doing that. It's just, we got to find the right way to implement or to redistribute those costs on the premium side so that they can match up.
All right, I'm done. I'm gonna let people other talk, but I think you should talk to Norfolk. They did a great job. I got to commend them on that.
Yep, for sure.
Kevin, you want to chime in on this? Or Jeff?
Or do we open it up to anybody in the public for public comment?
We're going to do the public forum. I think we're going to turn it over to Kevin Sweet. Is there any of the board members have any questions before we turn it over to the public? We'll have Kevin Sweet run the public forum part of it.
No, let's open it up.
Okay, we'll open it up. All board members have spoken on this regard. We can now provide an opportunity for the public to provide comment. I will ask first if anybody who was on the phone to ask a question, you'll press *6. For those that are on the Zoom, you can unmute yourself. And once we have a list, please identify yourself, your name, and your address only, and then we'll come back to you. Any questions? Ed, I see a hand raised for you. Did you have a question?
Yes.
Okay,
Can you
Ed, yep.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Can you just state your name and address?
Sure. Ed Haddad, I'm 138 Red Maple Run in Norfolk. I heard a lot of very good conversation about cooperation and coordination on these health costs between the towns, but I didn't hear one concrete step as far as moving forward. Just a lot of talk and no specific actions. Could you specify something that's more concrete than just we'd like to meet and it's a nice thing to do?
Mr. Sweet, want me to chime in on this?
I could speak as well, Joe.
Okay. Mr. Haddad, unlike a private sector, anything that's to do with health insurance in regards to municipalities, schools, has to be part of collective bargaining. So it's a lot of legwork to get everything ready together. To start the conversation is, in this perspective, is a start, and it's going to be followed through. I know on behalf of our town administrator, and I'm sure the town administrator, the other two towns are going to work together. But once we get to a point, then we have to go into collective bargaining with the union at the schools, at the all of our unions in the towns to make this work. So it may not look like in the private sector you could throw the gavel down and say it's got to get done. It's no longer process in this instance, and we're going to do. And I'm sure, I think we're all, myself and Jeff have all talked that this is something we definitely want to do. I'm going to go, Kevin.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ed, just to clarify, you are speaking specifically about the insurance initiative and topic that we're talking about right now, and not the wider spread shared services conversation that we have coming up in the next agenda item, correct?
I think so. I think the last chairman misunderstood. I don't think this has anything to do with collective bargaining. I think it was a collective town coordination of dealing with the insurance companies directly on how do we leverage our volume to lower costs, rather than, I'm not suggesting going into collective bargaining to reduce costs on that end. I'm talking about at the insurers and with the volume of the 4 towns or the 3 towns together, or the 4 units together. That's what I was talking about.
Yeah, understood. And I believe that it's not necessarily a cost reduction that would have the collective bargaining implications. I think any change would trigger a collective bargaining decision, whether it be cost savings, whether it be plan consolidation. I think at some point, all of those find their way into collective bargaining discussions, but I'll defer to Joe and Jeff if they've had a different experience.
No, I think ultimately implementation of the change will have some collective bargaining impact. And one thing we have to consider is all 3 towns currently are in separate consortiums for their insurance. So we're already in pools to try to lower costs. We're just in 3 different pools. So I think I'm happy to take an action item that one of the first things we're going to do is compare the 3 consortiums so we can evaluate the choices offered and the prices offered out of each and approach them back sometime over these next few months with, okay, for next year, if all 3 of us come together, what can you do better for us? We can start there. Now, that doesn't necessarily get us to the end line because when we actually implement that change, there may be implications with our different unions, but we need to start there. KP is a little different because I think they're self-insured, but that may be an option as we approach a consortium to say, what if we bring along KP as well? So we should be selling ourselves.
Well, I think that was the benefit of this, is bringing KP into the equation of adding that volume to your negotiations. Is there a benefit to doing that? I think that's what I think everyone was referring to or inferring. That's what I'm referring to.
No, I'd go a step farther. The 3 towns are already separate. The 3 towns ought to be together in this.
Oh,
for starters.
all right, I agree. That's great. So I think we're saying the same things. I guess it's the action step that referred to. I think that I haven't heard is what's the action step next?
So I think that's the next action step, is to talk to the 3 consortiums. But I think the reality of our timing is I'm not in a position to drive that for the next couple months because we're going to have other fish to fry, but that's a great summer activity.
Okay,
Do we have other questions?
I see a hand raised by Donna Jones. Donna, are you on? Did you have a question?
Yes.
Hey,
Donna Jones, Norfolk.
What's your address, Donna?
Norfolk, 64 North Street.
Thank you. Okay.
Question regarding the facilities that seem fairly new. Has there been any tracking method or software in place for facility maintenance? For example, like if a filter needs to be cleaned or changed on a schedule, or has everything just been sitting there and, oh, we didn't know that was supposed to last 10 years and now it's broken and it's a surprise?
Donna, I think that's a question that's better directed to Mr. Zinni or Mr. Azer.
Yeah, I can take that. No, we haven't just been sitting there and saying for 10 years, oh, we didn't realize that needed to be fixed. Most of our systems are on preventive maintenance schedules. So for example, you mentioned like filters, we have a schedule where we change the filters 3 or 4 times a year. We know how many to purchase, we know when they need to get done. The challenge we're facing is that the buildings are getting 12 to 15 years past renovations. And in some areas of the buildings where they're original, it's obviously much older. We do have, we're currently using a basic type of software that is tracking the facilities work, I guess to say. We will be implementing over the summer as part of the finishing of the capital plan, a more robust facilities work order system. Those of you who have ever reserved space in one of our schools, you know, our online calendar system, it's the same company. And what it's going to do is we're going to load capital plan into the software, and then when we have a work order, it can tie back into that specific piece of equipment. So we'll know, okay, that you know, that rooftop exhaust fan has been fixed, 3 times in the last 12 months. And we know from the capital plan, well, it says, okay, it probably has another 5 years to go. Well, we may need to push that up. And so then we'll have essentially real-time data that ties back to the capital plan so we can reprioritize. So once we get the capital plan done this spring, we're not just going to put it up on a shelf and say, okay, that's the plan, and we'll get to it when we get to it. Like we talked about earlier, is if priorities change, then just like with the budget, it's a living document, and we reprioritize and address the areas that are in the most need. So we are definitely ramping up our visibility to that kind of thing.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, any additional questions? Anybody on the phone, press *6 if you have any questions, or unmute yourself. Hearing none, I guess I'll turn it back over to Kevin Calcott.
Thanks, Kevin. So with that, there was no vote to be taken, or no, this is meant for a discussion, so maybe some directional output in terms of next steps. I think Jeff did a good job of identifying that, over the course of the next couple of months, all things considered, all the boards will be hyper-focused on budgets, town meeting, dealing with the COVID-19 crisis. But as he identified, when things do get back to a certain level of normal in the summer, knock on wood, we'll have more availability to really focus on some of these initiatives and put the effort into, as Mr. Zinni had identified, a subcommittee of sorts that might be able to explore these different paths in more detail. That being said, Jeff, Joe, unless you have anything to add, I think that we're good to move on to our second agenda item.
As you do that, could I interrupt and just ask if you need the school department personnel for this next part of the budget? We'd be happy to stay on if you need us, but if our portion is done, then we might also say goodnight as well.
No,
Kevin,
I just want to thank you, Mr. Zinni and Mr. Hsa, for once again for everything, along with Dr. Cameron. You're doing a great job always. We appreciate it. I don't think it's going to be a great conversation. We'd love to have you. We always like having an audience, but for me, I think I'm good. My board members, are they good with Mr. Zinni and Mr. Hsa? All right.
Thanks. It's my 4th Zoom of the day, so I think we're ready to kind of zoom on out. But thank you all. Have a good night.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thanks, guys.
All right, I'll give everybody a second to leave the room and stop the dinging as they exit. And if anybody is not on mute, if you could please go on mute to cut down on that background noise, it'd be greatly appreciated.
Got it. I muted everybody, Kevin, except you.
Much appreciated. Thank you, Kevin. All right, so our second agenda item tonight is discussion surrounding joint services and regionalization. This is a discussion that we've had ongoing since Q4 of last year. It was a casual conversation at first between the chairs of each of the 3 boards, and then it grew into a more developed conversation with the town administrators, looking for some priority items in which we could really see some benefits from consolidation of services, shared services, et cetera. So for this portion of the agenda, what we had identified was similarly to the beginning of our last agenda item, to toss this over to our town administrators who have really done the core of the work in this effort. Let them give their insights into some of the conversations that they've had and where things currently stand, and loop in the rest of the board members thereafter for any questions, comments, or suggestions for next steps. So with that being said, I'd like to toss it over to the Norfolk Town Administrator, Blythe Robinson.
Thank you, Kevin. So I think there are 2 things that were thought about to discuss tonight. First one was brought up by Wrentham, Kevin Sweet, about Veterans Agent Services. And the second one I would like to talk about, which is especially poignant in the last few weeks, about public health services, in particular nursing services, where Norfolk relies on a very part-time VNA nurse who's great, but is clearly being challenged with what we're going through. So I know those are the two topics. I don't know if Kevin wants to lead off on veterans agent. I'm happy to defer.
Yeah, Blythe, sure, I can jump in on that. So this conversation started a number of months ago, really spearheaded by the Franklin town administrator, Jamie Helen, with looking at contiguous communities and the desire to potentially to look at forming a regional veterans district. Their current veterans service officer director is slated to retire in about 18 to 24 months. He's currently a portion of his salary is funded actually by Norfolk County, and he provides services, I think about 6 hours a week to the town of Avon, as well as Franklin. So just kind of thinking and forecasting ahead, Jamie pulled us together, those that were contiguous. It made sense potentially to look at, our current veterans, current service demand, those type of initiatives, and looking at pulling that data together and trying to come up with a proposal with the town of Franklin kind of leading a larger, or at least at this point, potentially buying services and then potentially forming a more larger district. That conversation, we've been waiting on data back from them to look like at what that might look like. Reached back out and they were still kind of pulling numbers together. So we haven't seen anything definitive on that. Since that time frame, in January, the town of Wrentham lost our VSO, who took a position with the town of Marlborough. So we're looking at now, actually, we're utilizing interimly, just as sort of a stopgap while we kind of figure out where we're going next. Graciously, the town of North Attleboro has agreed to take over, much like they provide the services for the town of Plainville. We're utilizing their VSO really just to kind of, as I said, a stopgap to manage our current, I think we have 4 actives now that are on there. So that's kind of where we're, I think, we definitely are in a little bit more of a dire need, only because we don't have a VSO, and it's, I think, an opportunity, as I said, the conversation several months ago with Franklin, and now we're pressed to kind of move forward, at least forecasting into future fiscal years.
If I could add a little bit to that, which was a great overview, Kevin, I think it's also important to point out that for both Wrentham and Norfolk, we're, I think, anticipating that when the 2020 census comes out, we'll both be at over 12,000 population. And by state law, we're supposed to have our own person full time, which is likely more than we both need at the, say, 4 cases or so that we each have each year. And so getting into a district together is probably a good thing. We have a terrific agent right now, but he's probably getting close to retirement as well. So the timing also for us seemed particularly good.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for identifying that. Obviously, that would be another big driving factor, as you indicated, with the 2020 census and our anticipation. Certainly, neither of our communities, nor Plainville, would be in a position that we could justify a full-time veterans agent or full-time VSO, and the ancillary duties that they're allowed to do beyond that are fairly limited as well. So justifying that would be tough. So that's really a big driver at looking at a district as well. Yeah, thanks, Blythe. I don't know if Jen has anything she wants to share with that discussion as well.
The only thing I would share is, as you mentioned, we regionalized. We did a regional district with North Attleboro 2 years ago. They had a very robust system there, and our VSO had retired, and we were kind of in the same position that Wrentham's in right now. We were struggling to kind of fill that gap. At the time, we reached out to our surrounding communities, and North Attleboro stepped up and said, why don't we form a regional district? And it's been very successful. So I'm not sure how long you've been using Rebecca in Wrentham, but I think you're going to see that, she's remarkable. So it's been an incredible benefit for us, because she's brought a lot more services to our residents, a lot more outreach, a lot more reimbursements we're starting to see. and people are getting benefits that they never have gotten before. We have a very large veteran population in Plainville. And, you know, prior to Rebecca, I don't think there was quite as much outreach. And it's just been a really good success story. What we have talked about in some of our meetings is whether or not we do align better with Norfolk and Wrentham because we already have a regional school district. I think the tricky part for us will be what do we do with our existing regional.
Are there staffing requirements as you form a regional district that serves a population of 35,000 or 65,000 that gets significantly bigger?
It's a sliding scale based on, I don't know that off the top of my head, Jeff, what those numbers are. Blythe may have a better answer than I. I know she has previously come from a district, but it is based on a sliding scale, which would dictate the actual FTEs. And I think looking at least with Wrentham joining North Attleboro, I think we're actually going to be okay with the 1.5 that they had within that population range.
So I do have experience in that. When I was in Wellesley, we had a 4-town district with Wellesley, Weston, Needham, and Wayland. I don't recall the exact population off the top of my head, but we served those 4 towns with 1 full-time person, and then about a 0.6 person in our office who provided some back office coverage. It does need to get approved by the state, but you definitely in a district have the ability to spread out depending on your population and number of cases. The workload, you know, for the 4 towns could probably be done with 1 person or maybe a little bit more.
Kevin, if I could just chime in real quick. As part of the conversation that we had, and I think Blythe, you said in one of the meetings, is there's 500 veterans, if I'm not mistaken, in Plainville, 400 in Wrentham, and 400 in Norfolk. I think was the numbers we talked about. And we had a great veterans agent for years with Ken Oles. And when we lost him, he was really, you know, I know Mr. Nolan even reached out and said how great he was. And a lot of people said that he was very helpful. But when we went to the next level with Mike, one thing we noticed is that the services that he was providing was above and beyond just the basic reimbursements. The outreach to veterans, the gatherings, we all remember, we all attended the St. Patrick's Day brunch he put together last year with the help from our fire chief and some other people. We heard a lot. You know, our veterans now, the 1,300 veterans that are out there, majority of them are, you know, in the seniors are Vietnam veterans. And then there's Desert Storm and the Gulf War, Persian Gulf War veterans. And the services that we heard, what we heard is that the coordination of the support groups, the coordination of some of these programs that don't get done when you're just taking care of 4 cases. I think we need those services. And I know we threw some numbers out there. I think, Jeff, I think were you at the meeting we had in Norfolk? I know, Kevin, you had been injured, that, you know, $35,000 from each town could give us a 1.5 FTE to put together a great program that we could expand and do well with. And I think it's something we need to move forward with. You know, right now we're not paying $35,000. I know that's what Plainville's paying. I know Blythe and Norfolk, you're not paying that, but I think that's a small investment for our veterans that we really need to look towards and get a number, see if that will work for us and vet it out.
Yeah, I don't disagree. And our experience in the district with North Attleboro has really been phenomenal in the same way that you just mentioned. Both services and reimbursements have gone way up. And I wouldn't be averse to a 3-town. I wouldn't be averse to a 4-town district to keep what we have from North Attleboro and add you guys.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah, as I said, we're exploring. Part of the hang up, obviously, now we're, you know, with the pandemic, it's a little bit different, but the conversation was, as you probably all know, North Attleboro had a change form of government. They hired their first town manager. He just started in early March. So my hope was actually to sit down and meet with him at the end of this month. That may have changed, but to kind of discuss what from a budget perspective, as Joe said, I mean, yeah, we basically have a $6,000 veterans agent budget, which we figure for benefits, but the actual it's a quarterly stipend, and we got to consider paying for true services if we go out beyond anything. That's partly why we weren't able to Mike because of the low stipend. So there's no doubt our veterans line item budget will have to go up in order to buy services or join in. But I think we're at a point, as Blythe said, with our population, we're going to be forced to anyway. So my hope was to get that conversation going early spring, be able to try to budget for FY21. But also this was a good opportunity for us to use this as an opportunity as a trial, because we are joining in with them now on a limited basis. So.
Mr. McGovern, you're a life member of the military. Could you give us what your thoughts are?
No, it sounds like the way to go, the regionalization, especially if it provides the better outreach to everyone. I did have a question about what the personnel staffing would be if we had like 4 towns in it, but that's already been answered. So certainly I think that's a good way to move towards.
Mr. Nolan, I know that you were active with Deacon Oles when he was our veterans agent. Could you give us a little input?
Yeah, I know the commander in North Attleboro DAV, and they're always in an outreach program and trying to reach all the veterans that they possibly can. There's a tremendous amount of veterans in all 4 towns that have no idea what benefits are out there for them or what kind of help they could get. And most of them are very embarrassed to even ask for anything. And just to get them together to know that they're not alone and that they could, I know the VA sends out messages every day. And I get them on my computer and my phone all the time about meetings and different programs. But to have something local, to have somebody stop by, to say, like you said, Joe, to have a St. Patrick's Day party or whatever, or just a cookout in the summertime, just so they could get to meet each other and find out what was available to them would be great. And regionalization of that process would be tremendous, because it'd be just more people. Instead of a handful, you'd have hundreds, and it'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Joe, just to add to that, as Jerry kind of touched on, I mean, the other benefit there is residents have the ability to go to office hours that are posted in the other community. When you have a district structure, Wrentham may only have 4 hours a week in Wrentham, but when you do belong to a district, they may be able to go on a Wednesday over to Plainville, on a Friday over to North Attleboro, et cetera, et cetera. So you do expand the services if folks are willing to, travel, and they're all contiguous communities, so it's not that much of a burden. But you do definitely improve the service level to the veterans as a whole. So I think that's another great added benefit with the district.
Just wanted to add one thing we spoke about, I think, at the meeting. Jen, I think you were present. Blythe, I know we had, Kevin, you weren't there, but is there any way of incorporating our veteran services with the public health nurses to make like sort of a public health and benefits, veterans benefits type of a thing? So even though we may not have an agent in our town, between the nurses and the agents working together, could we put something together that would provide some great services for the veterans as part of that group?
This is Blythe. I don't know that you could have, we have to look at state law about whether you could have a district that does both of those services together, but you certainly can have one of each. I think it depends on where we're drawing the employees from. If it's Franklin centric because they already have the employee, and that's the best model, then we would work. They would probably be the driver of that. If health is more based on the fact that Wrentham or Plainville has the staff, and that's the best place to start. They might be different, but I think it's something for us to continue to work on.
Yeah, I would agree. The way I've seen that structured is when you have a director of health and human services and some of those functions where you still have a VSO that reports up to a director, but then there's overlap with with public health and nursing. They run a lot of times that interaction is with the public health nurses, but they are very distinctly different focuses and disciplines. So in a structure, you see more in some of the city structures that have a bigger organizational structure with a director of health and human services, where veterans often reports up through that, but it's very much a distinct separate role. So I would agree that there would actually be two separate districts. I could speak to the public health component of it. We've talked about a number of things. I think each of the towns are unique in what they have. Both Norfolk and Wrentham, contract out our services on environmental health functions, so related to Title V and wells and our food inspection mandates, those type of things. Whereas Plainville has a full-time health agent and a part-time health agent / admin person, I think. So really 2 FTEs, and they very much seem to have kind of the environmental health component covered with FTE employees. On the flip side to that, Wrentham is well staffed with our public health nursing staff, where we, as a community for our size, uniquely have 2 full-time public health nurses, which is a unique benefit and a service that we provide to our residents significantly above and beyond other municipalities and what they're able to do through home visits and a number of other advocacies. Town Hall has its own clinic and a number of benefits that we provide. So one of the things we're talking about is for several months, and we actually took the lead on submitting a grant. Hearing back from some of those folks on a regionalization grant, particularly for this focus, is they wanted it to be a little bit more broader. We haven't got anything definitive. We haven't got a definitive no, but we're looking at forming the grants they want to fund were for 2 or more communities that were much more encompassing of a public health district, not just a public health nursing services district. But nonetheless, we're still waiting on that. Continue to look at opportunities for grant and other funding that could help move this along. We have agreed to take over and have been doing so. And the timing wise, it's a little bit crazy, but we have taken over for Plainville the monitoring of their MAVEN system, which is the infectious disease portal, and probably a term that many of you have heard significantly recently, because that's the way that COVID-19 positives are being reported through the MAVEN system. So the town of Wrentham is managing MAVEN for the town of Plainville as a sort of a trial kind of basis as well, where we're providing a contract service exclusively for infectious disease monitoring and the MAVEN, and in hopes of looking at the thought was in hopes of expanding that in FY21 to provide additional nursing services beyond just the infectious disease monitoring, which is a state mandated piece, to look at things like blood pressure clinics and flu clinics and a number of other public health nursing services for Plainville, and also the discussion with Norfolk as well, which I think has a lot of. And before the pandemic crisis, certainly we had the capacity to be able, with 2 full-time public health nurses, to be able to provide that as a service for both Plainville and Norfolk, as well as maintaining Wrentham's level of service. So a lot of things have changed around that just over the last 2 or 3 weeks, but I'm happy to report it. We are actually providing that service right now for Plainville, and it seems to be working pretty well because they did have a gap in nursing services with the VNA that they had.
So from my perspective, those are the two priority items that we had, at least those that had presented some additional pass or resolution, some action items for people to follow up on. I think there was grant programs that were discussed as part of these discussions as well. But that being said, and those two things being the highest priority, I did want to also give the other board members in attendance on this call the opportunity to ask a question or provide some comments on the topic of regionalization as a whole. So unless Jeff or Joe, you have any objection, I'd like to go through tossing it over to the other board members.
No, I would agree. Regionalization as a whole and on these two topics in particular.
I'm good. Let's hear from our board members.
Very good. So going in alphabetical order, we'll start with Norfolk. Cece, do you have any questions or comments?
I don't at this time. I think it's really interesting. There's things that I really like about it. There's other things that I think I need more information that I'm capable of getting on my own and then circling back just in terms of value add versus already tight budgets. I understand with respect to the VSO, that's a different animal, but nothing at this time.
Thank you, Cece. Chris, questions, comments? You're on mute, Chris.
Kevin?
There you go.
I think it is the way to go. I mean, actually serving as the Wrentham and Plainville Animal Control Officer, there's some, even though it's sort of a quasi-regionalization, it works. And I think we're going to have to look at it at all levels. We're going to find with the schools, especially the regional school system, is we probably have to look at that and see if we can regionalize with our local school systems some of those maybe administrative functions, because as it's been pointed out tonight, with budgets only going up 2.5%, salaries tending to be over 3%, there is nothing left for capital. There is nothing left for a lot of the other programs and a lot of necessary programs for the students. And I think Paul mentioned, he said the middle school, they've got 1 of 3 boilers functioning properly. At the same time, they talk about it's all about the kids. If the schools are cold, the kids are not going to want to learn. So I think we really have to look at regionalization at every level, because we're going to find out that we just cannot continue to do it the way we're doing and provide the level of service, but also keep these towns running at their current budget levels. That's all I have right now, Kevin.
Thanks, Chris. And I will just add to the beginning stages of these conversations, we touched on a flurry of different aspects of municipal government in hopes of identifying some real and obtainable consolidated areas. Those range from different departments to different subgroups to different services. We had to have gone through at least 20 different aspects. And I think with these two presenting themselves as the priority at this point, the conversation doesn't end with those two. I think it just helps it grow into other conversations about other aspects of municipal government. So understood, heard, and thank you. With that, I'll toss it over to my counterpart, Jeff Johnson.
Uh-oh. I've lost my Zoom connection.
We can still hear you, Jeff. We just can't see you.
Yeah, I've lost my Zoom connection, but I would say Brian and then Stan, if you could go ahead.
Yeah, this is Brian. No real questions from my perspective. I mean, obviously, yeah, everybody's got to do their part to cut costs wherever they can, and if there's something we can do by sharing services, obviously we've got to do it. We've got to look into it, because the money's got to come from somewhere, and if we can help to cut or to save some money by grouping together, we should absolutely pursue that. And then one comment from a previous conversation regarding healthcare. I mean, obviously, looking at what other towns are doing, that we want to still be competitive with other school systems, but I think looking at the plans that we have in place versus what people would typically get in the private sector, there's a big difference there, which I think is why there's so many people on those plans. So I think it's important to look at what we're offering, what other towns are offering, but also let's start bringing some of that back to reality, because that's a huge expense that's continuing to grow every year. Thanks.
And Stan?
Yes, what I'd like to say is regionalization is the way to go. It would give us a little more clout. We've already seen how Rebecca has done a marvelous job for our veterans in Plainville by just siding with North Attleboro in that respect. If we were a regional district, Wrentham, Plainville, and Norfolk, we could get possibilities of shared water, shared public utilities, shared a couple other things, and it is the way to go. If there's any way of working something out that could be cost effective, then the town should look at regionalization. And that's about it. Thank you.
Kevin, looks like Jeff's still having dial-in issues.
Jeff, would you like us to toss it over to Joe and the Wrentham board, or are you going to?
Yep, go around to Joe. I have nothing to add. That was great.
All right, we just have to remember one thing before I turn over the board is that, I hear from a lot of people that we don't want another KP on our hands. But from we heard from our discussion is when we look at what KP pays to educate a student compared to what the 3 towns are paying, they're including their health insurance in that number. They're doing a real good job in saving us a lot of money. If we had to have our own high schools, each 3 of the towns would be in a bigger problem we are right now. So I'm a fan of it, and I've spoken enough about it. I keep forgetting Jim Anderson. I don't see his face. I see his phone number. So I'm going to turn over to Jim Anderson right now and for his comments.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, as you know, I've got a little history with regionalization with the MEC Center, and even when we started with that MEC Center, I had proposed back then sharing of other town services, which never really gained any traction. However, I absolutely believe that that's the way to go. So I'd be more than happy to have further discussions on this with the other towns at an appropriate time, as far as sharing services such as the town nurses, the veterans office. I think it's a great idea to band together for health insurance, for better buying power. And I think we need to also look at maybe possibly sharing some equipment, within the 3 towns. So I believe in regionalization. I think it's a good way to go. And I don't really have any questions. That's probably my only comment.
All right, thank you. Mr. Langley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So certainly I would concur. The sentiment is, for everyone else, so pretty much everyone else is about regionalization. But I agree, we need to be careful when we do that, as we don't want to create, another infrastructure, much like KP. And I think, the MEC Center, was a little different than when it was first proposed to us. And I think it's going to be a little more costly overall, but, that's still to be borne out. But to survive, I think, as Selectman Anderson articulated, equipment. I mean, we all get big, trucks in DPW, that we may not need to use that we can share appropriately. And little things like that, which are some big ticket items, can certainly help us when all of our budgets are constrained, by the 2.5 cap plus the new growth figures that get added into the levy. So, yeah, I think we should have some further discussions. I think, we should have scheduled meetings for these, whether it's a subcommittee or whether it's the committees as a whole, similar to this. But it's something we need to start doing more and look at it more effectively. So I'm on board with that.
All right, thank you. Mr. McGovern.
We've had these discussions about regionalization. The tides ebb and flow over the past 15 years or so with some good ideas and things that never happened. The word regionalization itself seems like in the past was kind of a dirty word. Shared services seem to be more what people kind of were agreeable to. But as I mentioned earlier, we got a KP budget that comes in at 3.4%, and we're still having a hard time reaching that. we've just got to look at any innovation possible to try and provide better services at the lower cost. I think there's some real low-hanging fruit here, ready and available for us. With the opportunities present because of people retiring and some openings, that's the right time to try and glom on that. We should do that very quickly, I think. And also, Joe, I liked your idea of combining the two services, the veterans agents and the public health services serve a lot of the same constituency. I don't think we should be deterred if there's anything that says state law-wise that can't be done, because those are things that we can probably work our way through. I think we should act on this very quickly.
Okay, Mr. Nolan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I agree with everybody. Everything that's been said about regionalization so far has been positive. It seems like it's the way to go in the future. Whether we like it or not, it seems like it's one of the only alternatives we're going to have other than raising taxes where nobody can live in the towns anymore. So as far as I'm concerned, I agree with everything that we've discussed, and hopefully we come together with something really good. Thank you.
Thank you. Kevin?
All right, well, it sounds like we've heard resounding support and alignment between all members of all the boards. Right now, this is in the hands of the town administrators. They are collectively meeting in a reoccurring fashion to discuss next steps. I don't know if they currently have a next meeting on the calendar, but I imagine that's where our next steps would lead us. At this time, I think it would be prudent for us to open it up to public comment. So Kevin Sweet, if you'd like to take that over, please do.
Thank you, Kevin. Yes, we'll open up for public comment. Those on the phone can press *6. Ask a question, please state your name and address, or you can raise your hand through this system. Any questions? Kevin, seeing no questions, I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Kevin. So just to touch on that last point, do you guys have another meeting on the calendar right now to reconnect?
Our calendars, at least from our perspective, have really been blown up. I have eight weekly standing conference calls, as I know my two colleagues do as well. Just inundated. It just, we did have some discussions lined up. As I said, I had a meeting arranged for the third week of March with North Attleboro and a new town manager and the current interim or acting advisor who's there until the end of the fiscal year. So that meeting has not been rescheduled or removed with all the closures. I think we can continue our discussions. The three of us talk regularly, and we'll certainly push ahead as much as possible in the wake of everything we're dealing with right now. I don't know.
Very good. Just to give Blythe, Jen, any input?
Yeah, not to make light of it, but a pandemic was not on the work plan. So I think we need to get a little further into what our new normal is, and then we can start rescheduling meetings again and working on it.
Yeah, I wanted to piggyback on something Kevin talked about earlier, and we used to contract out for our public health nurse, and through our conversations that we had about regionalization, one of the things that we realized pretty quickly was how robust of a system that Wrentham had. Plainville and Norfolk were strong in other areas of health, but public nursing in particular, which is something that we contracted out in Plainville, was very, it had a very robust and fantastic system in Wrentham. So when we lost our contracted nurse, we reached out to Wrentham, and we were in the middle of these discussions anyway. And as Kevin said, we started to use them, especially for the infectious disease cases, which I'm sure Wrentham at the time did not think it would delve into what it's delved into the last few weeks.
Absolutely not.
Sorry, Kevin. But I mention it only because, we, like everyone has said, we talk about regionalization all the time, but we actually have done it. So that was one of those low-hanging fruit that we wanted to try. So today we had our first case in Plainville. We had our first positive case for COVID-19. and DPH reported it to our public health nurse, who is the Wrentham public health nurse. And she provided all the outreach and all the steps that you're required to take on what is a complicated case, because the person had had quite a bit of contact with others. So I just mention it because it is one of those success stories that we talk about, and I think we just need to think about doing it more and more. We're in a very fortunate situation that Kevin and Blythe and I work very well together. So, and all three boards work well together. So the timing is perfect to do the things that we've always talked about doing in terms of shared services and regionalization.
Absolutely. Great point.
Kevin, if I can just chime in, during this pandemic, some of us, like Kevin and Jeff, I'm in my office at home working, my dining room actually, and I don't mind helping you guys out, you town administrators, with the three of us having some conversations to help move this through. Well, we have a little bit of an opportunity. Working from home, you have a little bit more liberty. We could take a half hour out a week to have a quick call to try to get some things progressing for you, because your plates are full. I'm on the phone with Kevin. I know I'm putting him through torture with text messages, and I know Jeff's doing the same with Jen, and I'm sure Kevin's doing it with Blythe. And I think you would enjoy us if we had another project to work on instead of bugging you people. But I'd be more than happy to work with the other chairs to try to keep things moving along as best we can while you deal with the situation at hand.
Agreed.
Thanks, Joe.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Good point. All right, so that all being said, and not hearing any other public comments, that brings us to the conclusion of this meeting. I think I'd be remiss if I didn't say thank you to everybody for bearing with us as we tried to navigate the virtual setting. We did have a couple of bumps along the way, but overall, I think it could have gone a lot further south than it did. So thank you very much to Kevin for hosting. Thank you to the town boards for attending. Thank you to the town administrators for taking us through everything. And thank you to all the residents who took the time to come in and listen to us and provide their input as well. We really do appreciate it. At this time, I'd like to initiate what is probably going to be a 10-minute adjournment process where each town will have to go through the process of voting to adjourn. At the top of that list is Norfolk. So in that, the way this will work, the chair of each board will make the motion to adjourn, and then we'll call for a roll call vote from only their members to adjourn, and then we'll move over to the next town, starting with Norfolk, moving to Plainville, finishing with Wrentham.
Kevin, I have a comment I'd like to make, or actually a question I'd like to ask.
Kevin, I see a hand up from David Rosenberg. Will you take a question?
You go ahead, Mr. Rosenberg.
Thank you. I understand that Plainville is part of a consortium with 22 other towns to buy bulk rate electricity for the residents of Plainville. So I have a question of how well is that working? Would you think it would be a good idea for other towns to join Plainville in that consortium? And in addition to supplying electricity for Plainville residents, do you think that you should, is Plainville as a municipality also taking advantage of that?
So I'm happy to speak to that. I mean, it has been a success story in Plainville, and our residents did see, significant decreases in the rates and comparatively to what others were paying. So it's been a success story for Plainville in terms. So I would encourage, other communities to look at it. When you go out, it's just like health insurance. When you go out and to bid with a large volume like that, you do end up with better pricing. So it was a success story, and it has been a success story for us. And I'll let I'll let board members jump in after if they'd like. In terms of our municipal buildings, there were only a few that we kept on that aggregation because we did get even better pricing through the MMA pricing structure. So we looked at whatever one was best, and then we chose it for each particular building.
Thank you.
Mr. Rosenberg, could you just, would you mind just providing for the record your address?
Oh, certainly. My name is David Rosenberg. I live at 123 North Street in Norfolk.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, so with that being said, I'm going to go through the list for our adjournment procedure, starting with Norfolk. As chair, I move to adjourn this meeting of the Norfolk Select Board. Do I hear a second from a Norfolk Select Board member?
Second.
I hear a second. Chris, if you could please unmute. We will do a roll call vote. Kevin Calcutt, aye.
Christopher Weider, aye.
CC Van Tine, aye.
Very good. Thank you very much. I'll turn it over to Jeff Johnson from Plainville.
And thank you, Kevin. Jeff Johnson, Chairman of the Plainville Select Board, and I hereby move that we adjourn the meeting of the Plainville Select Board. Could I have a second from one of my members?
Second.
A second from Brian Kelly. Thank you. And a roll call vote. Jeff Johnson, aye. Brian? All in favor of adjourning? Brian? Wow.
Aye.
Did you leave already? And Stan?
Stan Wyack, aye.
Thank you. Motion is carried and our meeting is adjourned. Joe for Wrentham.
This is Joseph Botash, Chairman of the Wrentham Board of Selectmen. At this time, the chair entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say, oh, roll call, I'm sorry. Joseph F. Botash, yes.
Steve Langley, yes.
Jerry Nolan,
Jimmy
yes.
Anderson, Jimmy Anderson,
We just need Mr. McGovern.
Jerry McGovern, yes.
Okay, that's it.
Thank you very much again, everybody. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.